And I think one of the things about this bill that I was reminded of is that water management in this province is incredibly complicated, and that's why robust and meaningful consultation is so important here. The reality is that we are operating in a multi-year drought. We have water-stressed basins right now. So while this bill does make more water available, it's not really having the conversation around water conservation and how do we make sure that we keep more water in the river. Whether allocations are being used to their full extent or not almost doesn't factor into that conversation around water conservation objectives and in-stream flows. We have watersheds that are stressed. So updating the Water Act to me means finding a way to incentivize and promote and enhance doing more with less water. We have less water throughout the year. But that being said, I will introduce a second amendment. Seems like everybody wants to talk about interbasin transfers, so I have an amendment in that regard, and I will pass that on there. One. It's 2 pages, so make sure you get both pages there. Yeah. Whole thing into the record, Madam Chair. I will just summarize it.
I suppose that might be my call, Honourable Member.
Madam Chair, with your permission, may I summarize the amendment instead of reading it?
I suppose a summary of this 2-page amendment would be appropriate. Honourable Members, this will be known as Amendment A2. You may proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So basically, the Minister just listed off a whole list of considerations that are a part of the conversation around interbasin transfers. This amendment tries to put some of those considerations into legislation so that Albertans can have some confidence and some certainty that there is significant rigor behind interbasin transfers. As the Minister has pointed out, other provinces have interbasin transfers approved not as a special act through the legislature. And so if we are going to do that here in Alberta, I think we need to make sure that those interbasin transfers are adequately defined, that there's transparency, accountability, and monitoring, and this amendment does that. So what this amendment does is it strikes out Section 3, which is really the 47.3, which is really that the Minister may by order authorize the Director to issue a license authorizing a low-risk transfer. We're concerned about that because it puts a lot of power in the Minister's office. And so this amendment will say that in order for the Minister to authorize the Director to issue a license for a low-risk transfer, that has to be determined based on the best available aquatic science and including water licenses that are existing, water allocation, rate of in-stream flows and tributary streams and main stem rivers. And also it requires that there has been a consultation process that includes consultation with First Nation and Métis settlements that is adequate and has written responses, and a public consultation for at least a period of 30 days, and a reasonable opportunity for members of the public to make written submissions. And that there is an opportunity for the public to view how their input has influenced the decision, and that there's also consultation with experts in the field of water science. It also has a section that is really about like post-interbasin transfer monitoring requirements to make sure that any interbasin transfer is meeting the conditions of the license approval, and as soon as it isn't meeting those conditions, that it no longer meets the applicable criteria, it needs to be amended to meet those conditions. So this amendment provides the certainty for Albertans that these low-risk interbasin transfers will truly be low risk. Interbasin transfers have been discussed in Alberta for several years, and they can happen now. I already have one, actually. Thank you. They can happen now, but they require debate in the legislature, and the reason for that is that the risks are high and difficult to justify. There's invasive species, which is addressed in the current version of the bill, but as I said before, water chemistry and biological and physical components are not. We need to make sure that even if these interbasin transfers are not debated in the House, that that same kind of rigor is maintained. So the original separations of basins in the Water Act and the requirement for a special act of the legislature is reflective of principles around watershed management and water conservation and the risks that interbasin transfers entail. The rationale for this more onerous process of interbasin transfers hasn't substantively changed since 1999. So it's great to update it, but we still need to make sure that that rigor is maintained. These changes would collectively reduce necessary limits and oversight that currently help protect the ecological integrity of Alberta's watersheds. The amendment provides additional oversight and attempts to bring more data, critical thinking, public feedback into the decisions around interbasin transfers. We need to more clearly define interbasin transfers. Right now, the bill just defines them as volumes, but there's no other requirements around aquatic ecosystems or not even, I wish there was some way that we could put in the bill the need for the proponent to justify why they need an interbasin transfer in the first place, because I think that that's an important part of the conversation that is not defined in this legislation. There's also no cumulative threshold of diversions. It hasn't been created, but it's needed. And whether the legislation speaks to cumulative effects or not, there does need to be this idea that there's a total amount of water that could be subject to interbasin transfer. And that should come out of regulations, but it should also be reflected that we're going to do that somewhere in the legislation. It can have significant impacts on the environment and the priority of other users in the water exporting basins. And these amendments are really focused on streamlining where long-term impacts of transfers can carry significant risk. The proposed changes are not consistent with the public feedback the Government of Alberta received from their water availability engagement, despite their assertions that public consultation informed this bill. So FOIP results revealed that when making decisions about water management and availability, the public expects environmental protection to be a top priority for this government. Just over half of the respondents recognized that interbasin transfers could be appropriate or necessary without a special act of the legislature if used to provide drinking water to communities, but that's not a condition contained in this bill. Most people, 78%, recognize that there are impacts to removing the requirement of the special act, and written response indicate continued expectations for careful case-by-case analysis of interbasin transfer applications and transparency of decision-making. The amendment I've proposed addresses that concern. Opinions of interbasin transfer are highly polarized in Alberta, with almost 30% of respondents opposing any form of exemptions, even for drinking water, which is kind of high, and many disagreeing with the range of potential benefits linked to interbasin transfers. I put that there because I really feel like whatever the decisions we make today in this House, there is definitely a need for more robust communication with the public as to why and what guarantees this minister and this government will put in place to make sure that our water is protected for future generations. The government's engagement also found that respondents across diverse sectors, including nonprofits, municipalities, agriculture, industry, academia, and the public, highlighted the importance of maintaining environmental flows while balancing competing water demands, and showed strong cross-sector support for establishing and maintaining in-stream flow needs and water conservation objectives for all rivers, with water conservation objectives as a key policy tool. While this should be considered in every aspect of water management, it's incredibly important for interbasin transfers. And that is not in the current wording in the bill right now. So we need to make sure that environmental flows are guaranteed. While some people think there are times when interbasin transfers are acceptable, we really need to make sure that this legislation has clear guidelines and parameters for who is making the request, why, the amount of the transfer, the time frame, the time period, and any conditions. All of that needs to be publicly available information, and the current drafting of the bill does not guarantee that. In March this last year, the Rural Municipalities Association passed a resolution to oppose amendments to the Water Act that would reduce approval requirements for the transfer of water basins of water between basins without the thorough consultation with municipalities. That resolution was based on concerns about enabling water transfers that are approved at a bureaucratic level without requiring cabinet approval, and that raises concerns about accountability and transparency in water management decisions. Municipalities were concerned with water transfers that could have significant environmental and economic impacts, including the depletion of northern water resources and the disruption of natural water cycles, and prioritizing water conservation efforts and resource management in the southern region, where the water usage is high, needs to happen before considering interbasin transfers. Now, I recognize that this resolution by the RMA was passed in March and more consultation has been done since then, but those concerns are still not addressed in this bill. So that raises this whole issue of like consultation can happen, but that doesn't mean that the feedback is incorporated in the bill. In-stream flow needs describe the quantity, quality, and timing of water flow necessary to preserve and protect the function and processes of healthy, diverse aquatic ecosystems long-term, while water conservation objectives are the targets set by the government to mark the minimum volume and quality of water that should remain in rivers. That is not reflected in this idea around low-risk basin transfers. If they are such low risk, then we need to make sure that there is a commitment in legislation to in-stream flows. There is no current scientific justification to do this change, and this amendment helps to ensure that scientific data will be part of the decision-making in a more meaningful way. This part of the bill and others seem to benefit a few large industries without due consideration for the protection of the long-term health of our aquatic systems and river basins. Some people think that if you're looking at interbasin transfers, you're already in trouble. And I have to say that I agree. Water is a finite resource. Water is life, but we do not have unlimited supplies in Alberta. So the decisions that we make about water, and in particular interbasin transfers here, are critical for now and for future generations. A proponent should need to prove that an interbasin transfer is required for their operations to proceed at all. The current bill contains no provision for public review of the interbasin transfers, and the minister did make reference to section 48.2 that says before making an order under section 47.3, which is interbasin transfers, the minister may consult with the public in a form and manner satisfactory to the minister with respect to the proposed order. But what is satisfactory to the minister? That could change month to month, minister to minister, government to government. So this amendment provides that more stringent requirements around public review, that it be for 30 days. It lists the stakeholders and that First Nations and Métis settlements should be consulted, and that there needs to be some things in writing that show that consultation has occurred and what that input received is. There's no opportunity for the public to appeal any of these low-risk interbasin transfers. We need to make sure, given the risk of these things, that the public is more directly engaged. And there are alternatives for interbasin transfers. The minister and I, every year in budget estimates, we talk about groundwater mapping. And I know it's hard, but really getting a better understanding of our groundwater supply and connections to surface recharge may be an alternative to interbasin transfers. Yeah, and I think with that, I'll move this amendment and take my seat.